Good morning, folks. My name is Miss Sinclair, and this is Miss Sinclair's History. Today, we are starting Unit 3, Time Period 3 in AP US History. This time period is really going to look at the Revolution in particular. And to start with, we are going to jump into the 7 Years' War. So, the 7 Years' War is sometimes known as the French and Indian War. Now, remember, you can listen to just the audio of this podcast, of this as a podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or you can watch the PowerPoint that goes along with it on YouTube. Okay, so let's think a little bit. What is the economic relationship between the American colonies and Great Britain at this time? There is a specific term I am looking for here. It is an important term for this time period. If you are thinking, I don't know, I can't remember, well, that might be a clue that you need to review a little bit more each day. Make sure you're doing your textbook reading, maybe make flashcards. But the term that historians use to describe the economic relationship between colonies and the mother country during this time period is mercantilism. So today we're going to be learning about the 7 Years' War. And our objective will be you will be able to explain the causes and effects of the 7 Years' War. So the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, is actually part of a much broader war happening in Europe. This is, in fact, our first European war that begins in the Americas. It will end up being Prussia, not Russia, but Prussia with a P, in Great Britain versus France, Spain, and Austria. And fighting will go beyond just North America, but also include India, West Africa, and the Caribbean as well. So how does this happen? Like what's going on here? Well, mercantilism and the navigation acts have increased tensions, especially in the Ohio Valley, right? British settlers are moving further west. As the settlers move further west, we're going to start coming in contact with French fur traders. And we will start to sort of, what's the word I want? Impede on their economic monopoly on the fur trade. So here's the thing. The Ohio Valley is going to be really good for agriculture. And the French, though, don't necessarily want the Ohio Valley turned into a bunch of farms. That's not good for fur trade. So we're going to see that France will try and consolidate power, their control of Canada through Louisiana, right, all along the Mississippi River. The French will build forts in the Ohio River Valley. And we see that it's this global competition for sort of control of this territory and the economic prosperity of it. So let's talk a little bit about our first sort of conflicts here. George Washington's going to enter the scene. Now, George Washington at this time is a very young man. He is 22 years old, and he is going to make a terrible error. He's going to go out west leading his soldiers, and they'll march out to attack one of these French forts, and it's going to be a complete failure. They will all be captured. Washington is going to be forced to sign a confession saying that he assassinated the French leader of a scouting party. France eventually sends them back, and Washington will actually be welcomed as a hero because he attacked the French first, at least. So, yes, France is fortifying Ohio. Great Britain will attack with 3 armies. The fact is, there are more British colonists than the French, but the French are better organized. So you have like Fort Duquesne near Pittsburgh, where General Edward Braddock is defeated. The French will be allied with the Huron, whereas traditionally, the Iroquois and the British had been allies. So this French Huron alliance really allows for a lot of early victories. Native Americans will be really brutal in their attack because they are frustrated by the invasions of British colonists, right? They sort of view this in some ways as a last stand, right? The French, sure, they might be there, but they're economic partners. They're not building farms. They're not cutting down trees. They're not taking land. They have an economic trade relationship established. Sure, there's a few French dudes who marry Native American ladies, whatever, those guys are fine. But the British are coming out west and they are cutting down the forests and transforming it into farmland. So the Native Americans have been frustrated by all attempts of negotiation, of deals being undermined, and just sort of an inability to stop this sweep of British colonists coming westward. We see that the French are just winning and winning and winning, right? Until you have the entrance of one William Pitt. He's a British statesman in 1757. So we have a change of generals. Now, in British hierarchy, to be a general, to be an officer in the army, you had to be an aristocrat, right? There was no, oh, you're a common man who worked your way up to this leadership. And as a result, most of the British generals were kind of lousy, right? They're not professional soldiers, they're professional aristocrats. So we start to see Pitt replacing these aristocratic generals with actual competent soldiers. He will drop restrictions on the colonies, promising to pay back the colonists if they help the British. Perhaps colonial unification would help Britain. So this is a turning point. William Pitt's leadership will allow for the British to start pushing back against the French. In 1758, there's a major win at Louisbourg, and then at Fort Frontenac. So in 1763, Great Britain has defeated France. General James Wolfe conquers Quebec on the plains of Abraham, and Montreal is defeated. The French lose everything. So the Treaty of Paris, and there's going to be a bunch of treaties of Paris. So the Treaty of Paris of 1763 essentially means all French control in North America is gone. The Great Britain ended up with Canada, and Spain got the Louisiana territory. Now, if you are looking at a map of the battles, you would see that a lot of these battles are taking place in what we would consider to be Canada now, in Nova Scotia, along the St. Lawrence River, near Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, in the Ohio country, along the Ohio River. And this was really pretty unsettled area yet. But the British victory is going to change the power dynamics in North America, and not for the better, for Native Americans. So many Native Americans had been unhappy with the British rule in the Great Lakes region, and they are going to form sort of a loose confederation, a loose partnership to try and push out the British, to take advantage of this moment of inattention after a war to try and reclaim this territory for themselves. They will ultimately fail, right? They will be defeated by the British. However, the British will change policies to appease the Native Americans, right? This warfare is brutal. They're killing prisoners, they're targeting civilians, right? This is where you have the famous incident of smallpox blankets being dropped off. The British, though, don't want to be in a constant war, a constant guerrilla warfare. in the Ohio Valley with Native Americans. So to stabilize the frontier, they are going to pass the Proclamation Line of 1763. Now, this is something you really got to know. This is a very, very important thing leading into our Revolutionary period. The Proclamation Line of 1763 is essentially going to be along the Appalachian Mountains. And essentially, it says you are not allowed to migrate west of the mountain range. Right? Everything west of the Appalachians is going to belong to the Indians. It's Indian country. As you can imagine, the American colonists will get frustrated with this very quickly. Something else that's happening during this time period is the Albany Plan of Union. Perhaps you have seen the very famous print or even on a flag or an image of a snake divided into pieces, and each piece of the snake is labeled representing different colonies, South Carolina, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, New England. And it says join or die. A lot of students will see this and think it is from the revolution itself. It's not. This is an image that comes up during the 7 Years' War. It's one designed to try and build support for Benjamin Franklin's Albany Plan of Union in 1754. Franklin's plan is essentially to have the colonies unite against the French and the Indians to raise taxes for a common defense. So representatives from each of the 13 colonies will meet. They'll discuss their short-range goals, the Indian problem, long-range goals, like needing to protect against the French. Franklin has this plan of an American parliament, right? We need one voice speaking to the different tribes representing all 13 colonies, some sort of president. Each colony would send a representative based off population. And this American parliament could tax the colonies and solve disagreements between them. It's an interesting idea. The slogan becomes join or die. And the idea is, look, we love the British Empire. We want to be part of the British Empire. We're not looking to get rid of Britain. Our bickering, New York versus Massachusetts, Pennsylvania versus Georgia, right? Our internal bickering is hurting the British Empire. And our real threat is France. So we colonies should get our act together to help the mother country, the British Empire, to fight France. Not everyone's a super big fan of this idea. King George III really doesn't like it, right? The idea of the colonies teaming up and forming their own government. Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for revolution. And there is jealousy among the colonial legislatures. You have to really think of these colonies as having very little in common in terms of goals and motivations, right? They do not think of themselves as one country. They think of themselves as 13 separate countries in many ways. Each colony views itself as so independent. If you can really sort of cement that idea in your head, it will help you understand the debates over the Constitution and whether or not we should even start a revolution. Right? The American colonies are like fire and water in many ways. And some people think if there's no way we can team up together, right? We're going to end up going to war with each other. There'd be a civil war, and then only the slaves and the Indians would be the winners. Plus, this fear of Native Americans remained high, and they don't want to cut deals. They want to sort of remain strong with their ability to negotiate or attack their native neighbors, whether you're in Georgia or Pennsylvania. So in 1754, nothing really happens, right? This Albany Plan of Union is important for historians because if we're looking at continuity and change, over time, which is a historical thinking skill the College Board really likes to develop. The Albany Plan of Union shows that even in 1754, right, there's already this idea of a colonial legislature, of representative government, of the colonies uniting against a common enemy. So it's not going to be a new idea when we have our first Continental Congress. So if you were going to look at a map comparing North America in 1754 with North America in 1763, you would see a couple distinct, well, really one distinct difference. In 1754, you would see that North America would be divided up between three countries. Spain would have essentially the Southwest and Florida territories. France would control everything between the Appalachian Mountains up to basically the Great Lakes, as far west as the end of France had everything from the Rockies to the Appalachians, basically. And then between the Appalachian Mountains, the Atlantic Ocean, as well as north in Nova Scotia and around Hudson Bay, would all belong to Britain. After 1763, after the French Indian War, you see that there is no more French territory on the North American continent. Instead, Spain controls everything up to the Mississippi, and Britain controls everything east of the Mississippi. If you haven't yet watched this crash course, U.S. History on the 7 Years' War, I do recommend it. It is a helpful overview, and John Green brings in some primary sources, which is also helpful. So if we're thinking about historiography, though, what might be some different historical interpretations? What are some different ways we might tell the story of the French and Indian War? If you're looking at a primary source or a secondary source, you always want to be thinking about what's the point of view here, right? What would be the point of view of the French Indian War told from the perspective of a French general or a Huron or an Iroquois, right? Iroquois partnered with the British, Huron partnered with the French, but they're both Native Americans. That would give them a very different perspective on this conflict. What about the perspective of an American colonist or a British soldier? What would be the perspective of King Charles, right? Or sorry, King George. King George, King Charles. Let me double check really fast. I know I just said it, but I am, King George III. What would the King of England think of all this? He would have different concerns, larger geopolitical concerns than an American colonist or even a British general fighting in Canada. So think about what might be different historical interpretations of this war. For your summary, I would like you to explain the causes and effects of the 7 Years' War. Thank you for listening. If you found this helpful at all, please consider leaving a rating and review. My goal here is to create something that's helpful for students, teachers, and anyone who wants to learn more about U.S. history. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.